You'll see me looking around frantically from side to side because I'm just trying to check the feed and make sure we're all good. LinkedIn is dreadful at giving us a place to share a link or any way of directing people towards a live broadcast. I'm hoping that's something that they will fix at some point, because at the moment, the best way I can recommend anyone to find this live show is to just direct them to my feed. And that's the only thing I seem to be able to do. However, hopefully, in a minute, I'll introduce the guest for this week, but hopefully, as I talk, people will be finding this. I'm just going to quickly go and get it up. And also, the other thing that's happened this week is that StreamYard, which is the live platform that we're using, has enabled comments within the actual application. So it makes it a little bit easier for me to see what if you're asking questions, or if you've got questions to ask. And therefore, please do that if you want. And I'll see if I can respond to them. And it'd be good to see if it's working as well within StreamYard. So I think what we'll do is we'll hop on over, and I'm going to introduce my guest for this week, who is Amy Woods. And Amy runs a content business called Content 10X. And that's a pretty good fit for what we're talking about on this show, because we're all about content and sharing content, publishing content, creating content, all that kind of stuff. So if I click my little button here, I should be able to bring in. Hello, Amy. How you doing?
Hello. Good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah. Good, thank you. So yeah, I know you, don't I, from probably through Youpreneur and a few other places like that, from probably at least a couple of years ago now, and been seeing you doing great things on stage there and also in your business. So tell me, just to introduce yourself a little bit, tell me what Content 10X is, what you guys do, maybe some of the people you work with, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So we are a creative agency, I guess, first and foremost. So we provide a kind of end-to-end content repurposing service for businesses that embrace content marketing. So the businesses that we work with tend to be, kind of small businesses, brands, entrepreneurs who embrace episodic type content. So video shows or podcasts, live streams like this as well. So any kind of episodic content. And what we do is we will take the original core content. So the whole premise is you focus on creating that brilliant video or that brilliant podcast episode or great live stream. And then we take care of everything else afterwards to really maximize it and really get the message out there and grow their audience and the reach through what they're trying to say. So what that can look like is, for example, taking a live stream like this, let's say, and then turning it into a blog post that could go on their website, an article that could go onto Medium or LinkedIn. We could create lots of social media videos, take lots of great sections and sound bites and things like that, and create videos for Instagram, Facebook, and things like that. Strip the audio from a section or the whole thing, whatever works, and turn that into a podcast episode, and so on and so forth. It could, all sorts of infographics and email to email subscribers. So we create all of that content as part of a repurposing, I guess, proposition to the clients that we work with. So that's what we do as our core for the business. So as you mentioned, I do speaking, where I tend to, speak at industry events and local and kind of global, like places mainly in the US as well, about content marketing, content repurposing. I published my book last year as well. And we just brought out our toolkit, which if we're not doing it for you, but you want a bit more than the book and the free content, then that's kind of got video tutorials and templates and things like that to show people how. So trying to expand beyond the agency and offer other products, but anything repurposing, that's what I am, what we do.
Exactly what it says on the tin. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, well, we'll come back to some of those things, I think, towards the end. I think particularly maybe some sort of tips around what people can do to kind of get started with this sort of thing. That'd be good. I'd like to maybe kind of like pull back a little bit and then kind of start broad, and then we can focus in maybe a bit more towards the end then. I mean, obviously, I bang the content drum quite a lot, and obviously, your business kind of focuses around that. What's the kind of, why is it important? And also, is it for everyone? Is content marketing for everyone, do you think?
Whether it's for everyone, I guess it really does depend on what kind of business you are. I think that content is, just really, really important in terms of if you just have a website where, it's almost like a pamphlet or a brochure where it just says what you do and you don't have any other form of content, then you're competing against other businesses that have similar offerings and products, but they have lots and lots of different content. Then, when you're trying to get people to truly believe that you know what you're talking about, to trust you, to recognize your credibility or authority, it's very difficult if you're not creating content. And I think it's important to get found by the search engines, get found on social media. People aren't just going to find you. You have to put things out there in order to get in front of people, and then they'll come back to your website and start working with you. So I think it's really important. But to your question, should everyone do it? I feel like I should be saying, well, yeah, of course, everybody should be creating content. But, I guess if you have a business where you have absolutely no problem with finding leads, like let's say you have a nail salon and every single day when you open the door there's 50 people queuing up waiting to get the nails done or something, I wouldn't necessarily say you should have a blog about how to do nails, because they clearly don't have a problem getting people to come through the door and serve people. But I think if you're trying to if as part of your marketing, if you're marketing and you are, for example, using things like PPC, like paying per click or Google AdWords, or you are doing Facebook ads or Instagram ads or things like that, you've got to have content as well, because there's no point in paying for people to come to your website and then when they get there, there's not really that much for them to do, not much for them to see, not that much for them to consume. So I think you have to combine both if you're doing that. So if you want more customers and you've got a customer problem, then yeah, I think you should be creating content.
Who doesn't want more customers?
Yeah, exactly.
But I suppose it is probably geared more towards people maybe where they are a character or personality within their own business. So I mean, obviously some bigger companies where it's maybe or certainly the content that you create for a much bigger company would be quite different. Yeah. And maybe what we're talking about here is more sort of service led or B2B or kind of or or if you're even B2C, but where you're a coach or a personality or an individual or somebody or someone who needs to kind of deliver that expertise.
Yeah, I think so. It's really important for personal brand type businesses. Like, for example, my business, is a great example because it is it's very personal branded. I've always been the front of it. And I guess because we're small and there are big agencies and we're a small agency, the one thing that we have is that personal touch and getting to feel like you trust and like the person running the business and the team behind the business too, and things like that. And you can only really achieve that through content. So that's how you can really compete, I think, against some of the bigger ones with the bigger budgets and things like that. So yeah, I think so. I think you're right. In terms of it depends on the kinds of business, but I still think, and is it product based or service based? How much traffic do you get to your website and things like that? It can all make a big difference, I guess, can't it? But I think that if you're trying to become a known authority, I think that's maybe one of the key things, is that if you want to become known as an authority and a leader in a certain industry, then content is the only way that you can do that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I have all my own theories about these things as well, but it's always useful. And one of the reasons I love doing this show is just to kind of get other people's takes on it. And I would agree with that absolutely. What then do you think the challenges are? Because we've all probably dipped our toes in to a lesser degree or more into this sort of content marketing pool. It's certainly, if you're a small business or if you're just working with a very small team, or if there's just one of you even, it can be quite time consuming, and then you can spend quite a lot of time creating something, and then you don't necessarily get the impact that you hoped from it. Or, and sometimes it's hard to tell, isn't it? You can create one piece and it kind of flies and everyone pays attention to it, and you create another piece which you think is going to be a winner, and it's crickets, So what are the kind of challenges in sort of staying on that, creating that machine or staying on point with that and consistent with that?
Yeah, because I think consistent is key, isn't it? You know, it's really important to. I think that it's really important to commit to one form of content and get really good at that. So I think a mistake I sometimes see people making is they're trying to do everything. They're trying to maybe grow the YouTube channel whilst also trying to get a really successful podcast off the ground, and they're also sticking to the blogging and they're doing live streaming and things like that, and it's all a little bit too much. So I think what you said, consistency is really important. So I think firstly commit to one core piece of content, so whether that's video or podcast or blog or whichever, but commit to one, and then we can talk about repurposing. I'm sure we'll move on to that, but I think first just commit to one. So consistency is really important. So I think you need to then agree, okay, so if it's going to be video content, I'm going to start creating videos. You need to then work out what would be your schedule. So is it going to be weekly? Is it going to be every 2 weeks? But whatever it is, and there's no necessarily right or wrong, but whatever it is, then stick to that and try and be consistent in that. I think messaging is really important. So I think a mistake that I see people sometimes make is they're not really that strategic with the content that they're creating, and it's not very intentional. So not necessarily truly thinking about who am I talking to, why and how am I trying to help them, but then ultimately what next step would I like them to take after consuming this content as well. Right. So knowing your audience, and then if you're creating content in order to become known for what you're known for, then making sure that your messaging is always really clear and consistent so that people do start to think of you as that person. Sometimes I think people sometimes embark on it and they are quite scattergun approach in terms of what they talk about. And the irony is that they'll build an audience of people who follow them and like them and consume the content. But then if you were to survey their audience and said, what do they do? What problem would they solve if you wanted to pay them some money? They might not actually be able to even answer that question. They just really like watching that person's Instagram feed, or they just really like listening to that person's podcast. And I will admit that when I first started the Content 10X podcast, it was always about content repurposing, but and I wanted to become known as somebody who helps people maximize the content, but I didn't really have a next step, and I didn't really say what my business was. I didn't actually tell people, and by the way, if you want help with repurposing and that kind of thing. So I think it's add lots of value, but don't be shy as well in saying how you help people, and if they want more help from you, then what the next step would be as well. So I think it's that just being really intentional, being really clear with your message, making sure your audience are going to start to understand and recognize what you are, what you do, and if they were to work with you, what problem you would be helping them with, and being really consistent and knowing that content is a long game as well. So, if it is video content and you don't have hundreds or thousands of, let's say, if it's YouTube is your focus, if you don't have hundreds or thousands of YouTube followers in your first week, month, or even 6 months, don't give up, because it's a long play.
Yeah, and I think the consistency is part of that long play, that you really need to be there every week, and or every other week, or whatever it is, and just kind of like people know you're going to show up. And that's one of the things I've learned from working with some sort of high level entrepreneurs now, that that's basically their kind of mantra. It's just you just keep showing up. I mean, I was on James Shrumko's podcast this week actually, and and that was episode 749. And this is a podcast that I've been listening to since 2013, I think, and it just keeps going. And I had a quick chat with him afterwards, and he was just like, I just keep going, and they all come back. They go off, they do their £2,000 courses or whatever, and then they come back afterwards, and I'm still here, sort of thing. And there's a real kind of there's something powerful about that. But his message as well, to go back to what you were saying about consistent message, it is kind of pretty repetitious once you've been following that podcast for a while. And I found that as well, that, I kind of feel sometimes like I'm just repeating myself, but actually you do need to repeat yourself, and you do need to have a consistent message. And it's a little bit, I sometimes compare it to like a rock band. If you go and see U2 or something like that, they're still playing, like half their songs are still the songs that they were playing like 20 years ago. They're still just playing the same songs because that's what people want to hear, and they know and they understand that that's what they do, and I think it's the same sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And just because you start to feel a bit repetitive because you're the only person present every single time you are saying it. But so it's going to feel repetitive to you. But sometimes people ask me the question about repurposing, and they'll say, well, aren't you going to be kind of boring your audience, or not boring, but aren't you going to be kind of sounding repetitive if they've seen you talk about that on the podcast, and then later that day, they see a video about the same thing on YouTube, and then they see something on Instagram, and it's like, well, firstly, I don't necessarily think people are following you, that closely that they are constantly looking at everything they're putting out on every channel. And if they are, they're not, that's good, because you must have a super fan there if they're following you that closely. And also, I just think that you're staying true to your message, and it's better to do that than have a scattergun approach, because I don't think anyone would ever get in touch and complain that you're sounding, like you said, they're not going to complain when pop bands and top bands play the same music, because you've actually bought a ticket to hear them play that music. So you'd actually complain if they just came on and only played new songs that you'd never heard before. That'd be a bit disappointing. People want to hear what you're known for, don't they? I've certainly seen bands where I've been a bit disappointed that they tried too many new things, and I really did want to hear a bit more of the older stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay. So, well, you mentioned a minute ago that, sticking to one type of content is important. And I think you're right, certainly until you get the handle on that and kind of get good at it. Or unless you've maybe you've got a bigger team to help you facilitate more different types. Is it true also that you then need to stick to one channel? Because I know one of the things you were talking about, certainly, that you do is to spread things around a little bit, but you also hear people saying that they should focus their attention on a single channel. So how does that work out? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on where your audience hang out, but I guess I don't really think that is the best play usually for most people. But again, it does depend on who your industry and your audience and things like that. But I do think that omnipresence is important, actually. And I do think you should try and be in the different places if you are trying to grow and reach new audiences. So that's, I think, where repurposing comes in, because if you are putting out and putting a lot of effort into a podcast, not everybody listens to podcasts. So you're already really restricting your reach, because even in the US, which is very progressive, still only 7% of people regularly listen to a podcast. There's a lot of people that don't. So firstly, I don't think you should put all your eggs in one basket and just stay in, say, on YouTube, or just with Apple Podcasts, or just with Spotify, or that kind of thing. But I think that's where repurposing comes into play. Then I think you should start thinking, well, where else do my audience hang out? Okay, you have an audience on Instagram, but you've created this video for YouTube. So let's turn that into a square, less than 1 minute teaser, and let's do 3 or 4 of those, and let's start reaching people with the same. You've put all that time and effort into that great video. So you're only maximizing the time and effort you've already put in, but let's reach people on Instagram because people are there. And also, you have people on Twitter. Well, why don't we create a short video and share that on Twitter as well? And so on. So if you have audiences there, the whole point is you're maximizing what you've already created and putting it in different places. But I think a key thing I would say is making it platform specific. So it's not just copying and pasting the same thing and putting it on these different platforms. If you have an audience there, you still have to think, but this is a different place. And why are they there? What kind of content would they like to see? And so how could I repurpose this that I made for YouTube into something that is more what the Instagram people are looking for, or what the Twitter people are looking for, or that kind of thing. So I think I genuinely think that you should have focus on omnipresence, but not if you only have an audience in one place, or you really do just want to grow YouTube and nothing else, then fine, stay there. But I do think that you should focus on having the content on your own land, so to speak, as well. So making sure that there's still content on your website, as well as all of these different places we go to send people to our website. So putting the videos there, putting graphics there, putting blog posts there and things like that, even if you do send it out to other places as well. But yeah, I think being everywhere as much as you can is actually, it's going to help you grow and reach people you would never have reached with a one channel focus.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you're kind of touching on there, which we come across quite a lot when we're creating content, and this can be, social media content, but it also applies to the sort of high end, big brand videos and stuff that we work on as well, that there's 3 stages in creating something. There's the planning stage, there's the production stage, and then there's the distribution stage. And the planning stage is actually quite a long and an important part of it. And actually, certainly if you're just doing something like a simple social media video, the production part of it is quite simple, really. You just put a camera up and kind of do it. So actually what you're doing is you're maximizing on the planning time. Like you said just a minute ago, you takes quite a long time to get all of those ideas correct and right, and maybe do a little bit of research or bring some stats up or whatever it is. So that's the bit really that you're repurposing, isn't it? The actual production part of it is kind of, that's the bit, that's maybe less time intensive than the first part of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's like a kind of quote that I say a lot, which is repurposing starts in the planning phase. Repurpose is not an afterthought once you've got the content and then you scratch your head and think, how am I going to repurpose this? But actually, you should plan that in advance and focus in that way so that everything repurposes like a breeze. So, for example, when we work with clients who are repurposing a live stream like this into a podcast, let's say, we really kind of try and help them plan the entire flow of the broadcast. Some really like highly produced live streams, and there's sponsors and all sorts, and it's a really well put together broadcast. But if we're going to repurpose it, we really plan the flow so that there's a segment that is going to be great audio only. There's not going to be visual cues that would not interest an audio audience. There's not going to be banter between, back and forward between the live stream viewers and things like that, because that would not be that interesting for an audio only listener as well. So let's segment it. So that's the bit that's going to become the podcast. And then, also, even just having separate segments of shows that you can pull out for different aspects of repurposing. And I actually did a podcast episode the other day that I haven't put out yet, so I'll just tell you what it was about. But it was about how, top shows like the chat shows in the US, so the late shows and late show with James Corden or Jimmy Fallon show and things like that. I love how they plan their shows in advance in all of these different segments, and then certain segments of their show becomes a totally different piece of content shared in a different way that even grows a new and different audience. So the Late Show with James Corden with his carpool karaoke bit, which is just part of the Late Show, has taken a whole life of its own, where it's obviously it's on their YouTube as its playlist. It even has its own TV show here in the UK, the Carpool Karaoke, but that's just segments from the Late Show that's been stripped out into a new TV show in its own right. It's got a whole new set of fans, and I actually would say that I really love the Carpool Karaoke. So I think I've seen nearly every single one of them, but I haven't seen the show it came from. But I've become a fan of a segment of his show. And I think that's really clever content creation, because there's other bits too, like they wind people up, and that's another YouTube playlist, and that's another audience that watch wind-ups and stuff. And I think that is a great way of planning content in advance and then having marketable segments for different platforms.
Okay, so you're kind of creating niches within your own content, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's super clever to do that. And we're not saying everyone could do that, but I kind of likened it to, like, say you have a podcast. If you had certain segments that you did every week, like the quick fire round of the week, where you ask the same 5 questions in a quick fire and it's funny, and you do that with every single guest. That quick fire round could always be the audiogram that you share on Instagram, and there could be another, like, what is your profound quote of the week or something, and every week when you ask that could become the quote image. So it's planning in advance, like clever segments that can go on and become something in their own right as a different form of content in a different place.
Brilliant. Okay. So yeah, I'm just having a quick glance over, and I can see comments. Actually, I've got some various people having a little chat over here on the right. Mostly seems to be people kind of like chipping in with sort of ideas, which is great. If you've got questions and you want to ping a question over for Amy or myself, then pop it into the LinkedIn box there, and we'll get round to it in a little bit. There's about 30-second delay on what I can see. It's really confusing. I'm basically looking down the camera here. I can see Amy's face chatting there and there, but they're both in my peripherals. And I've got sort of comments coming up here. And then I've got this one, which is delayed by 30 seconds, which is the actual feed. So it's a total multitasking thing, which for a Friday afternoon, I think I'm quite chuffed about. So can you, I mean, because obviously you do this kind of thing with clients quite a lot, so you've maybe kind of seen it working in the field a little bit. Have you got any examples, or can you think of any were there any times where you saw some really interesting results by taking something from a platform, so maybe it's like a YouTube live, which goes out pretty regularly, and you moved it across onto another platform like Facebook or Instagram or something like that, and you got some really good results off something on a different platform?
Yeah, so one example I can think of is a client of ours who, her business is she teaches people, ladies and men, but mainly ladies, how to do lash extension. She has a membership, a beauty membership, focused on a really niche aspect of beauty treatment. And she had a successful video show that she was doing, but when we started working with her, we were repurposing her videos into podcasts. So it was the same content. It was kind of taking the audio really from the video, and then we launched the podcast, and then then it's on all the apps, Spotify and Apple Podcasts and things like that. And what was really interesting there was that her audience, who did watch the videos and enjoyed watching the videos, were elated when she announced that it was going to be on a podcast too. And actually, because a lot of them will be in their industry, driving quite a bit between appointments, going to different people's houses for home appointments and like mobile technicians and things like that. And so they made time in their day to watch the videos, sometimes miss them, because like you have to actually sit down and watch a video. But when they heard that, they were like, you've made my day, because I'm now going to listen to that when I'm driving or when I'm walking the dog and things like that. So I found that really, really interesting, because it was just something that we threw out there. We were doing other things with the video for social media platforms and writing an article, but throwing it out there and saying, do you think your audience would just like to listen to this sometimes? And it was like, I don't know, let's give it a try. And it's probably one of the fastest growing podcast we ever launched, because so quickly, because they were already there, but just so quickly, bam, she's had 1,000 people listen to that, or however many it was, very quickly. And it was just them and thanking her, like writing her emails and everything, just saying, it's made my day, I can now listen to it. So there you go.
That's really interesting. I suppose what you're doing, because you said, you said a little bit earlier, and it's one of the stats that came out of the summit that we were at last year, that, not that many people listen to podcasts. And what you've essentially said there is that you might have an audience watching stuff on YouTube, and when you open it up as a podcast, you're essentially opening people up to that format. So it's not like you've got a pre-existing podcast audience. You're actually shifting, a viewing audience maybe into an audio only audience.
Yeah, exactly. That's what happened there, and it was just funny, but I guess it just went to show, like how her audience consume content, and because it was work related content and they're generally on the move, it just made sense that I guess it depends on that. Statistic's interesting, isn't it? 37 or something % of people regularly listen to podcasts. It's actually lower as weekly listens, and that's America, which is quite progressive, obviously, in that area. But then it does depend on your industry, doesn't it? Because that can be very, very different for different niches and things like that. But yeah, you know, like another funny one is that we've got a client who launched a podcast, and what's funny for him is it's elevated his authority and his positioning in his industry, which is a very niche industry, so much so that even if people don't necessarily all listen to the podcast, his audience are all on LinkedIn, and they're seeing all this content going out about how he's just done episode so-and-so where he interviewed, you know, such and such a person about a certain topic, and they're all seeing this all the time. Oh, he's done another podcast, he's spoken to this person, he's spoken to the, you know, CEO of this company, that company, and his business, like, I went through the stratosphere, seriously, when he launched a podcast and then started creating all this content, because he grew his credibility, his authority and things like that just went through the roof, because people started to sit up and pay more notice to him, because he launched a podcast in an industry that wasn't really known for podcasts at all. In fact, I think it was the first podcast in his industry. And like I said, I don't necessarily think all these people who were then booking him in for a meeting to discuss doing business with him necessarily listened to all of the podcast episodes, but they suddenly saw him in a different light because he had a podcast. So, you know, that's just another kind of interesting aspect of what we talked about at the start, growing your authority. Sometimes the very nature of the fact that you go in the extra mile to create videos or podcasts just shows, puts a different perspective on you compared to a competitor that isn't creating any content.
Yeah, and you look pretty organised and quite on it as well, I would think.
Yeah, exactly. You do. It just really makes the profile.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions over here, and actually one of them feeds into the next kind of question which I've got, which is really about the best kind of formats to use. And I think now you've mentioned, you know, using kind of Facebook Lives or live videos, which are kind of maybe slightly longer format video. Steve asked, you know, he just does, quite similar to myself actually, shorter kind of 1 to 5 minute kind of web videos, I suppose, for platforms like LinkedIn. Is there any way you can repurpose that kind of content? Is that, or does it really have to be longer form, or what can you do with shorter pieces like that?
Well, with a shorter piece like that, and we work with quite a few people who create shorter videos like that, especially if it's for YouTube, where they may be more like 3 to 5 minute videos. I certainly think, at least if you have audiences on different social media platforms, then it's a great idea to create teasers, like shorter versions of that video for the different platforms in different formats. So creating a slicing maybe a 30-second really great standalone clip, not just any 30 seconds, but like choosing that really profound thing that somebody said or something like that, or that you said, and putting it in portrait format, getting captions on there, looking at really well branded with your colours and your logos and everything, and putting that into things like Instagram stories, Facebook stories, creating a square version, 30 seconds or so, putting that onto Instagram, again, all depending on where your audience are. But firstly, I think looking at how you can create more video. I like to say video babies, like your main video has a few little babies and you put the babies on the platforms. Then written content, I mean, just like never disregarding how important it can be to write a good article or good blog post based on what you've said. You know, if it's a short, you know, when we worked with Jay Bear on his Talk Triggers show, which is like really great, really recommend it to everyone, the Talk Triggers show, where he talks about word of mouth marketing. Those videos were all, I think, 6 minutes long. And, you know, we got a good blog post from each one of those, as well as a podcast episode, you know, a short little bite-sized podcast episode as well. And then lots of small videos, and then graphics, quote graphics, visuals. What great thing did you say that you could turn into a quote, pull quote image if it's on brand for you to share that kind of content. But also, I think like things like conversation starters. So you've just one video where you maybe covered a few different topics that could have had a great conversation starter of getting other people's opinions on what you've said. Think about what 5 questions could come out of this video that could be the next 5 posts that you post on LinkedIn or the next 5 tweets that you tweet. Think about the platforms and what they're there for. Twitter's very conversational. Maybe it isn't a short video, maybe it isn't a pull quote image, but maybe it's just have a nice little spreadsheet of 5, 6, 10 questions that you could ask and ask them, because you can always lead people to, well, I did a video on this actually over on my YouTube, when you've got the conversation going and things like that. So sometimes the repurposing doesn't start with the content, it starts with a question or an engagement starter, and then from there go to Instagram and run a poll, ask a question on there, use their Instagram engagement features, but relate it to the video and content. So I think there's loads. I think the most important thing to think of maximizing a content and a message, it's not about content, it's about the message and what you're trying to say. So it's not how do I break this video down, it's more how I've communicated this message in video format in this place. How can I now communicate this message maybe in a different format or maybe in the same format in a different place? So think of it more as different ways to communicate something as opposed to different ways to like repurpose something, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and going back to what you were just saying a second ago about creating maybe a short blog post or something from a shorter video as well, that you could flip that around actually, because I was just thinking about how if you'd created a short video and then you're thinking like, well, how can I create a blog post from this? And you're thinking, well, maybe I can't because there's not enough in it. That's maybe an indicator that the short video isn't got enough packed into it. They're quite a good test measure for kind of seeing whether you've got enough going on in even just a short video to justify longer form content from it. It's maybe a good benchmark for it,
Especially if you write, when I create a video, I usually write a little bit of an outline first, where I know, obviously you know a lot more about this than me, but like where I know my the hook and I know the points I want to make and things like that. So you probably, if you do it that way, you've already written something out anyway. You've already typed something out. So then, like turning that into something more. And like you said, if you take a step back and think this this wouldn't even make a 3-point blog post or whatever it may be, then maybe I should have a bit more meat on the subject in the video. And also not forgetting you can repurpose blog posts into videos. So maybe your video is already a repurposed blog post because you're getting into video content. Because we often have this where clients come to us and say, we want to start creating videos. We've done lots of blog posts. Actually, we've got probably about 1,000 blog posts in our archives, but we want to turn to video content. And when we chat about it, it's like you could probably turn loads of your blog posts into a bit of a video outline, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. You've already done the hard work and the thinking to come up with that brilliant blog post. So let's just turn that into a script and then turn that into a video. So it can go both. It can go back or forward with video as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. Well, I had a couple of questions as well. I think David's asked, is there a danger of spreading content too wide, too many platforms for a particular target audience? I suppose we've kind of talked about, spreading it around as much as possible, but I suppose there comes a point where, if you're spending time putting it onto platforms where you don't have much audience, then maybe that's not the best use of your time. Is there anything else you'd add to that? Yeah.
No, I agree. I think you just have to look at what's happening and see if it's taken and if your audience are there. And you don't have to feel like you should be everywhere. You just have to feel like you should be in the places that your audience are. And if you genuinely do think that your audience are only on LinkedIn and you really don't need to be doing anything on the others, that's great. But I would then recommend still having different types of content on LinkedIn, because some people will like to watch a video and some people would prefer to answer a one-line question and some people would prefer to look at a quote graphic and things like that. So, still think about repurposing and having a kind of different dimensions to the content that you put out on one platform and go all in on that. But yeah, don't be focusing on platforms where nothing's happening, because it's just a waste of time and effort.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought about that. And I suppose you might want to spread that out. If you create a video and then you create a text post from that video, that you probably wouldn't do that in the same week, but you might do it like a few weeks later or something, just to kind of keep it circling.
Yeah, with all the wonderful social media scheduling tools out there, Buffer and Meet Edgar and SmarterQ and all of those different tools, you can plan things out in advance and really spread things out over a month, 3 months, 6 months. Just again, like always thinking about, what do I want people to do? Do I just want to get a conversation going? Do I want people to go on and read the blog post I wrote about this, or the video, or sign up for something? But just think of different ways to communicate with people.
Do you know a way to schedule LinkedIn video to a personal feed? Because I don't think there is one that I know of anyway.
To a personal feed, it's mainly all pages, isn't it? When we on Buffer, my team schedule my personal posts.
Well, I might have to go back and have a look. We use Post Schedule, and I know that you a couple of months back when I was looking at it again, you couldn't schedule it. You could schedule it to everywhere else, but not for LinkedIn.
Buffer does, definitely. Just today, just before we chatted, I noticed a testimonial gone out from Buffer onto my. We don't use the page on LinkedIn. We only use my profile. So I know. Well, same. I mean,
just one of those things that they just, it's very difficult to get any traction into a business page. I read a thing that came directly from LinkedIn the other day there, and they were suggesting that you should be posting on a big business page like 4 times a day, which kind of suggests that it's more of a sort of rolling brand thing rather than a sort of personal brand sort of thing. So, don't know. Anyway, let's have a quick look at the. I've got one more question to ask you, so I'm going to have a quick look at the questions over here quickly and see if there's anything else. Someone asked. It's come up with LinkedIn user, so I don't know who the name is, but you can tell me if you hear this. Someone asked what our favourite types of content to produce are. Have you got a particular leaning for your own content, Amy?
Well, for me personally, I went all in on podcasting, so I create my podcast episodes, but I actually am pivoting more to trying to do more video content, and I'd say for me it's becoming more video content, but short form videos, and not being quite so brave like you, David, to go into the world of live streaming. But short form videos is what I'm kind of moving to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, oddly, I've kind of moved from the short term to the live thing. Although I'm still doing the short form thing. There's something. My background is in teaching, so I suppose I'm a little bit more used to just kind of running something for a period of time. But there's something quite nice about live video because you can't pore over it and kind of like get sort of pernickety about all the little errors. You just have to, you press the button and you just have to go, and then it's kind of, you write a few questions down and off you go sort of thing. And this, in a way, it's a lot easier. And I found it much more much easier to have a regular commitment every week because, so I suppose it's the same with a podcast. If you schedule it to have, a weekly podcast or something like that, that firstly, when you do something with interview, it's a little bit easier to create the content because somebody else is helping you with that. You don't have to do it all yourself. And also because you've kind of committed to having a guest involved in what you're doing, it means that you have to show up and do it, and you can't kind of put it on the shelf and go, I'll do that next week sort of thing. So I'm actually quite enjoying this at the minute. It's it means I've always got something to send out to my list or put on my website as well, so.
Yeah, you build it. I genuinely think you build more of a community and a more of a following around your video content if you go live. And it's one thing for me saying what I do, but when I chat to clients, I always try and encourage them to embrace live if they can, because I do think that live video isn't just content, it's an experience and content. So it spans both. So I actually think that it is the best original form of content if you are brave enough to embrace it.
Great. Okay. Well, so Grace, we've been going for 45 minutes, and it doesn't feel like that. So obviously, I thought you'd have a lot to say, and we've dug in fairly deep on some of those, which is great. I can see a few more questions over here. I think what we do is we can nip into the questions after we finish this video and maybe answer any of them like that. That'd be good. Could you give us just quickly before we kind of wrap up some kind of first steps or some easy ways of managing, repurposing, so that the people who are watching or are able to kind of maybe take a piece they've done and kind of do something else with it? What would you recommend in that way?
Yeah, I think what I would recommend is try not to think of it as a separate thing. It's all the process of content creation, whether you are creating something that is repurposed or whether it's the kind of the original piece. It's all content creation. I think that if you are trying to just get started and doing it yourself, then just don't try and do everything, because you'll do everything for a week or two and then you'll stop and do nothing. I think just take it one step at a time. And we've covered on this in chat a couple of times, but I think know where your audience are and maybe just focus on either one additional place or one different type of content to begin with, and try and, if you can, maybe make it a different format. So a great idea is, if you do video content, then if you do one thing, why don't you create a blog post about it? Because it's really good to remember that content, to really win with content, you want to try and span both search and social. So something like turning a video that is on social media into a blog post on your website is going to help. The video helps on social, but the blog post is likely, if you do SEO, some keyword research, can start to help you with search. So, thinking about search and social, but more than anything, have a certain amount of time that you will dedicate to content each week, and make sure that it's not all just churning out new with no repurposing. Try and have a certain percentage of time that goes to the core piece, and then a certain percentage of time that goes to the repurposing, remembering that what you're trying to do is reach a new audience, and expand your reach and your impact, and take it one step at a time until that new thing that you're doing, that blog post that you write after every video, becomes a habit. You don't even think about it anymore. And when it's there, then think about the next thing, which could be, okay, now I'm always going to create a quote image and I'm going to put that out on LinkedIn or that kind of thing. So one step at a time until it becomes a habit. Then think of the next thing. Try and think of search and social, and just think about where your audience are, and don't be focusing in places where you just think you should be, but you don't necessarily get any traction when you post anything.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And actually, to kind of spend, if you created one amazing piece of content every month and spent, the rest of that month making sure that everyone saw it, that would probably be a lot more valuable than trying to create something every week and then just not really having the time to make sure anyone sees it, certainly in terms of your time that you've invested in it. And I think it's with social networks, there's this tendency to kind of think, oh, everyone's seen it now. And like, I put my post up there and it had 100 views. And so everyone's seen it. And you're like, well, they haven't, because the social networks only showed it to 5% of them anyway. And also there's another network and your email list and your website and possibly some SEO somewhere. And it's just like actually putting some energy into making sure that those channels have been properly tapped is better than just turning your eye back to another piece of content, isn't it?
Yeah, and I get so many people who come to me and they'll say, I don't repurpose my weekly podcast because I'm so busy. As soon as I finished one episode, I go straight on to the next one. And it's like, well, what do you do to make sure that anybody actually listens to it? Because otherwise it's just kind of spinning around on the hamster wheel, without pausing to think, who's going to listen to this? How am I making sure people understand it? How am I going to get this message to more people? Just like the constant churn, get off the constant churn. Yeah. And start dedicating an ample amount of time to the repurposing and the marketing of it. And so a lot of people actually say the statistic, which is 20% create the original piece and 80% market and repurpose the original piece. So it's not even 80-20 the other way. It's actually 2080. But find whatever works for you. Like I said, small steps, one at a time, and just see what takes and what happens, and then go more in on what you're getting traction with.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time and your insight and all the rest of it. And I can't believe you've written an actual book on this. So, I mean, if you want to go and read, I mean, it seems like, sort of actually a much bigger area than you think if you manage to turn. And it's not even a small book, is it? I mean,
I've got it on my desk here. It's like it's a very, very, very thick one. We took
incredible.
over a year to write it. So, it's pretty comprehensive.
Well, so you can go find Amy's book if you want to read further on the subject. And where can we find you, Amy, if you want to come and have a look at what you're doing? Just
to head to Content 10x, which is content10x.com. Just head there and everything is there.
Brilliant. Okay, well, again, thank you very much for your time. Have a nice weekend. And as best you can at the moment, and we'll probably see each other either online somewhere or hopefully in person within the next 12 months, but who knows. Thanks again, and take care.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thanks, David, for having me on.
Okay, brilliant. Right, I'm going to just come back to talk quickly about next week's show. I'm not going to have a guest next week partly because I'm just not, because I'm going to have a little break from it, but partly because I thought I'd do a little solo show for a while. And something that's just come about recently is that LinkedIn have introduced analytics for personal feed videos, which I thought was quite interesting. So next week, I'm just going to do a shorter live cast, probably at 4:00 again, probably about 20 minutes, quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, just looking at some new analytics features for LinkedIn, which enable us to get a bit more insight about our videos and be able to kind of respond to that a little bit better. But for now, thank you for tuning in. If you've asked a question and it's in the feed, I'll do my best, and Amy will as well, to get in there and answer those in the next day or two. But I'll maybe see you next week. Thanks for tuning in, and have a good weekend.